everybody who's working, especially everybody who's working to make a difference in the world. And what he actually said was for the problem solvers. And so that, at least equip the problem solvers of society with better tools and methodologies and language to be, as effective as we possibly can help them be. That as the greatest and most important opportunity for society, which, by the way, is still true. There's nothing historic about that. This is so true, even today, especially true today, especially relevant.
And that research project on human effectiveness was a research proposal that he had sketched out long before the Mother of All Demos in 1968. This was something that he had put together in a conceptual framework, and had done work even prior to that, as I understand it. This had been building up for a long time, but the proposal that was evaluated, the research proposal, was that 1962 paper, is that right?
Yes, the paper that I struggled to read this last week. That is a report on 2 years of work, 2.5 years of study, sort of a deep dive, mostly just him, into all of these concepts and looking at, sort of just basically a trail of wonder rigorously explored in all dimensions, in all directions. This report summarizes all of that work. And during the time of creating, of doing that thinking and pulling together the conceptual framework, he was writing successive summaries of the research agenda that he would be proposing. And so he actually came up with a very concise 9-page summary called Program on Human Effectiveness. And in fact, he sent a copy of that to Vannevar Bush in 1962.
Did he ever hear back from Vannevar Bush?
No, he never did.
A major inspiration for some of the work he did.
Yeah.
Because the story is he ran across, as we may think, in a radar shack in the Philippines?
Actually, a Red Cross library.
Or a Red Cross library.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the Philippines, in a traditional Philippine hut on stilts.
Right.
Yeah. So he had just shipped out from Treasure Island, where he was trained in. There was an elite training for engineers on the new technology of radar and radio communications. And he had read about radar several years before. It was this was being developed during the war, and he realized that he really wanted in on that. He wanted to be learning all about that, and because that was at the forefront of electronics at the time for him. His dad had been a radio, what's it called?
A ham radio. Oh, really?
Yeah, he had his own radio repair shop.
Oh, interesting.
And so he sold and repaired radios. So that was, my dad was fascinated with all kinds of technologies, but that was one, and radar was like, whoa, way beyond that. So anyway, he got accepted. He applied to the Navy, to that school, and was accepted into that school and trained in that. And that really was an elite. They trained a certain number of engineers, and then they deployed them because this new technology needed people who could manage the deployment of it and maintain that and all that. So then he was put in charge of the radar and radio communications in the military. And that's why he was in the Philippines. So he had just arrived in the Philippines and had a layover at the first island they pulled into until they were going to be, stationed at their destination. So he heard there was a library, and he loved to read. He heard there was a library, so he went and hunted it down, and it was this hut on stilts. And he went in, and there was the Life magazine article. So this was the republication. It was the reprint of the Atlantic Monthly copy, but it was the one with the picture.
With the pictures, that's right. That's right.
So he read that, and he was thrilled. He remembered, he remembered being really thrilled and telling everybody about it. And I go, gee, I just read this. He always said, gee. So, gee, I just read this. He was such a country boy. Gee, gosh. Yeah, so he actually said those things.
No, I have to laugh because I know I've shared this with you before. So the first exposure I had to your dad's work was when I had just come off of reading As We May Think to read Augmenting Human Intellect, a Conceptual Framework, the 1962 essay. Both of them had been mentioned in an article in a trade magazine, Computer World. So I was still kind of reeling from that, but your dad had done a talk, this is in 2003 or 4, at an Accelerating Change conference. So I was working on editing the audio of his talk together, and so that's where I heard, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you or not.
I don't think so.
So your dad and I, he didn't know anything about it. We were sharing some quality time there for a while because I was there with my home PC. I had downloaded the audio, and there was his voice just in my head for hours and hours because I was editing it out, editing out the pauses and so forth. But it was so funny because he would talk to us that way. He would say, well, gee, and then he would say, and then he would say things like, well, I wonder. And it was such a quality of thinking aloud, and it was so genial. Yeah. I just fell in love with the guy. I just thought, whoever this thinker is, I've read the framework, I'm listening to this, and I spent just a long time editing that thing together because I thought this is some of the most amazing stuff I've ever heard in my life. I want this to be just perfect. And afterwards, Doug Kay, who did the podcast series, said, nice job, Carter, nice and tight. So I thought, it's for Doug. But it was just fascinating because he was a kind of a country boy, and he was...
Well, he self-identified that way, all through his life.
And so...
And he felt sorry for my mom because he always wondered if she had really wanted someone more cultured. And so we're like, Dad, just...
Yeah, I think they both did okay. I think so. But it was that quality of humility, of course, but also there was a kind of childlike attitude of wonder. Yes. And discovery. He never seemed to get tired in all of the talk that I was putting together of any of the ideas. It was as if he had just thought of them. And so there was that freshness to it, too. Right. It always seemed fresh. And in fact, working with him over the years, starting 10 years after the Mother of All Demos, and then I went off and did something else. And even at that time, I didn't really get the vision as much. And then I came back, hooked up, and we started the Institute together. And that's where I started really trying to understand the whole vision. What was your question? No, what was my question? I don't know if I have one. Oh, the quality of ongoing wonder and the way that he... I mean, I've seen quotations where he says he never got over being naive, and that there was such an intellectual openness and generosity about what he was doing. He had his vision, and he was completely obsessed by that vision. But it was always something he seemed to want to invite people to share, and not just beat them over the head with it. Well, he was very consensus-driven. What was interesting about so working with him and refining the thinking and refining how it's presented and all of that kind of stuff, every time I go back to the 1962 paper or the 1961 program on human effectiveness or watch the 1968 demo, I'm just struck by, oh my God, he really had all of it then. He had the whole thing. And then, then it was a matter of refining this or that and more, refining how people, trying to tailor it more to how people want to hear it or might listen better. Because it was always a struggle trying to communicate the concept. And when I look back at some of this stuff now and I think, it's so clear. His opening statements in the introduction to this paper, in 1962, they're so clear. How could you say it better? Well, in fact, and you and I were looking at this earlier today, the students in the course working with the essay, several of them have picked some of those opening statements because of that clarity.
Yeah.
There was one of my students in my section, Sarah, and I'm sorry, Sarah, I'm going to say your last name wrong because, of course, I haven't heard it, but maybe you can help me with it. The idea here is we learn as we go. Bernier, is that right? I hope, Sarah. If anybody knows Sarah, please ask her to give me some guidance. At any rate, she was working on a particular passage from that 1962 essay, and she quoted one near the beginning, and she said, "This is how you would want to live your life. This is what school is for. This is so clearly about something that is, beyond just software or hardware. It really is about what Alan Kay would call a stronger conception of life." And so the clarity there is completely breathtaking to me. I don't understand what's not understandable.
Right.
But there was a struggle, you say.
There was a struggle to get these ideas across. And I think, he always attributed that to a different paradigm, because when people understand a different world and have a different way of looking at the world and being in the world and expecting how it's going to work, hearing a completely different paradigm is very difficult, and there's a quality to it, which is like, you can pull a little bit and then it snaps back, and pull a little bit and it snaps back, and then at what point does it come all the way over into the new paradigm and say, wow, now I see it. But with something this big, it's a huge vision. There's just so many elements to it that you can get there on one dimension, but then the other part, no. I mean, people would come and say, "Oh, collaborative tools, I get it. Wow," and that would be the extent of it. But no, that's not. And part of it is the content, and then part of it is the process. Like, there's creating knowledge. An ecosystem for supporting the methodologies and artifacts, language, and training. But then there's the whole process of how you do that, how you further the research, and how you introduce it to a working body of people.
So the ecological or even the biological metaphor seems very apt to me, because we don't, in our own bodies, we don't think, it's just about a kidney, that's all. I mean, everything else is kind of just, everything else, but the kidney, that's it. No, there has to be kidneys, there has to be a heart, there has to be lungs. All of these things have to be operating in the way that you would want musicians to play together well, that a really great conversation can take on a life of its own. It can't be that, we'll just fix this. It's that phrase that I never tire of quoting, and we do not speak of isolated, clever tricks that help in particular situations. We refer to a way of life in an integrated domain.
Right.
But thinking in terms of an integration is it's a huge challenge. It's almost as if it's easier for our bodily organs to do it than it is for our brain to think about.
Right.
And so when he would try to get that across and try to talk about the paradigm, he would talk about the tricycle and the bicycle. Were there other ways that and when the two of you began to work together, were there ways that these ideas seemed to get across that you began to focus on?
The best tool, someone created a tool for him, and someone from Apple University who had attended a workshop with Deepak Chopra, and in the course of the workshop, Deepak Chopra told him, "You're doing great in all these areas. One thing I'd like you to see you do is do something from the heart for someone else." And so the very next thing he did after coming back from the workshop was go to a lecture by Doug Engelbart. And so his name was David Gendron. And he all of a sudden started thinking about how he could help portray this stuff in a way that makes it more accessible. he was into, what's accessible for learning, and he had studied many different models, Eastern and Western, for how people learn and how to portray the information. He's just brilliant that way. And so using Macromedia Director, he created an environment that and simplified some of the slides and helped out work out a map of the concepts. And this was really helpful. We call it the Bootstrap Paradigm Map.
And that's on the Engelbart Institute website. It's
on the Engelbart Institute website. And so I can maybe later I'll give a little tour of where some of these methods are.
That would absolutely be great.
Yeah. And in that study guide that I posted, I posted, I believe, a link to that as well.
And I should say for those who are watching who might not be part of the course that's going on this summer, that there is a website. It's at thoughtvectors.net. And on it, we have the activity of all the open participants, of all the students who are taking the course for credit at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I'm teaching, and where Christina Engelbart is our guest today. All of that is aggregated on this site, and the site is called thoughtvectors.net because of Doug Engelbart's description of the way we would interact via networked computers. He called it thought vectors in concept space. And that too is a pointer to a new kind of a paradigm. So Christina has been posting some things to her own particular blog site, which we then aggregate in. It's part of the properties of the web, that we can take things originating in one spot and pull them in, aggregate them in other spots, and try to get to that vision of thought vectors in concept space. And we can do a tour of that and a tour of the Engelbart Institute website. As we get into the latter stages of the hangout. As always, it's 5:05. We've been at this now for 35 minutes. The time just flies by. I want to make sure that I am looking at the Twitter stream to see what kinds of questions might be coming in. I'm also trying to look at the Google+. I can see that Cindy Jennings, who works at the University of South Carolina Upstate, is one of our viewers. And,
hi, Cindy.
And she asks what I would call a very poignant question, that in the effort to find ways to share the paradigm, she wonders, was anything lost in translation? That is to say, to try to explain the bicycle to the tricycle folks. Did your dad feel like there was something that never quite got across that way, or that there was something lost in translation? Did you feel it when you were working with him?
Oh, yeah. I would say 90% of his work was lost in translation.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, it's really hard. And, I think mostly the paradigm thing, because you can talk about the vision, you can talk very clearly and succinctly about each portion of it and how it all fits together. It's recursive, which makes it difficult. It's relational, not linear. You could start at any point, and you don't have to, there isn't one way to go through it. So you would tailor that to audiences. If they want to just hear about technology, you could start by talking about, the technology and what you're trying to, create tools for, and then back into more of the vision. Well, and while you're doing this, consider that there's a whole human side of the equation that also needs to be addressed, and then, how we can do this. There's a bootstrap and an approach, but, whatever it is, whatever people came to hear, they stopped listening after they heard that part, pretty much. And also because we're not used to hearing something so big, I think there's also an element of people who do want to hear, and they're trying to think about how they would implement this. How would they implement this? And pretty soon, when you start to see how big it is, then it's like, wow, I would have to change everything, including how I think. And it's like, some other day or something, but they still can't hear it that far. Brett Victor, who is after my father died, and there were so many articles that coming through from all the newspapers, and people were blogging, and there was so much of a focus on that he invented the mouse and he invented these technologies and he's credited with these technologies and the mother of all demo technologies. And he said, guys, you're missing the point. This would be like, if you get a chance to talk with a guy who invented written language and only let him talk about what pencil he's using. And that's very similar. Andy Van Dam had a similar observation several years ago. It's time out. Listen, it's not about that tool.
It's a difficult thing for human beings to be able to understand, much less use their mind's ability to imagine beyond the boundaries of the familiar.
Right.
I always think of, as you know, poetry is one of my great loves, and I always think of a great poem as a kind of a technology to pry your mind loose from ordinary ways of thinking so that you can begin to see the world afresh. It can feel a little strange. It can feel very exciting. And every now and then, you get a vision. You go, oh. And that was the other thing that your dad would say constantly in accelerating change. He would say, so then you think about this and, oh. And then you go to this and then, oh. And many of the other speakers at the conference would say things like, and then this and this, right? And this and this and this, right? And I was so struck that your dad didn't go,
That's
right?
That's a great observation.
He would just go, so, oh. Well, as I say, that was the beginning of a very intense kind of attachment, and some might even say obsession with your dad's work, because it was the character of mine. If he had never invented the mouse, I just know that attitude toward how we need to be thinking as a species, individually and collectively, was going to bear some kind of spectacular fruit, unless there was some kind of early tragedy. So let me ask you about how.
What I was going to say,
go for it.
Is that I think there, had the funding continued, because he did get early funding. Bob Taylor was at NASA, and he thought, oh, this is cool. Someone wants to do basically human computing, and he kind of had thought about, there was some thinking about that, but here's somebody coming with a whole paradigm, a whole framework, all that kind of stuff. So give him some money, and then he talked to Licklider, who was coming into ARPA, and said, hey, put some money into this. And so then Bob Taylor went to ARPA, and then there was more funding. So that was great, because they didn't have to convince the world that it was the right approach. They only had to convince the funders, and there was enough vision in the funding arena. So they could do the work and then start presenting that and presenting parts of that, and the intention was that was just phase one of the research. And the idea was that then it would fan out phase 2, phase 3, and keep going and keep iterating. And that the longer you do it, the faster the iterations, because you're getting smarter. You have all these tools and a completely new way of working, and you're, not only are you changing all the time, but you're changing fast enough so that it actually makes you better. Because you could keep changing all the time, but it could slow you down if you're not doing it well. So even the change part, they were getting really good at. And that's part of the approach that was built into it.
And what happened? How many of those phases did they actually get to?
Well, they started, so the 1968 demo was 1968, and then he even announces during that demo that the following year they would be coming on board to the ARPANET project, which was the precursor to the Internet. So this was already in the works, the solid implementation plan for the first distributed computer network in the world, and his host was selected to be the second one to be hooked up to it. The reason was because at the meeting where Bob Taylor announced that he was going to do this, he announced it to his principal investigators that he was funding. My father was like the first one to jump in and say, wow, that's exactly what we need to be doing. because of course it was part of the vision. It was like, wow, somebody's already doing this technology. It means we don't have to do this technology, and it also means, wow, even sooner we get to expand our, into distributed collaboration. And so he volunteered to run the first, sort of facilitate the first online community in this new network by running a network information center, so people could find out who are the other people on the net, what are the resources available, and how do we find them, who do we contact if we need help, and that kind of thing. So there were some of the researchers present at that meeting did not want anything to do with it. There's, wow, why do we want other people coming in on our computers and, asking questions, and, we're trying to get our research done. There's, few people there. So Bob Taylor picked four of his PIs to be the first ones to hook up to the network, and they all set to work helping with the protocols and starting to have meetings and what's the RFCs they started. So the guys in my dad's lab, particularly Jeff Rulison, who was the chief architect of the software in his lab, was sort of an instrumental part of that early community of planning how we were going to, getting onto the network and getting that going. So that was long story, 1969, and the next thing that they wanted to do, since by 1968 the software and hardware were pretty mature and well exercised, because this wasn't just like this, like, let's build a system that other people can use. We are building a system. We are the first users. We're going to exercise it up and down and all, from all sides. We're going to be the most aggressive users and the most, unforgiving users, and really shake it out. And so they did that, and they got better and better at it. So they were getting a very smooth running system that had all, the basic features that they had planned for. Now we're ready to start finding organizations who are interested in learning about what new technology is going to be possible. Here's some that we can start using, a research prototype, not a commercial product, but a research prototype. And so my dad started enlisting some pioneers, or expedition quality pioneers within these organizations who could help figure out how they were going to start introducing the technology into their organizations. And my dad called them knowledge workshop architects. They were the architects of the knowledge environment for their organization. And this is before CIO, obviously, decades before.
And I would say it's a more ambitious description of what that could be than most CIOs are involved in right
now. The knowledge architects for the organization, and so the knowledge workshop architect. And so he didn't just identify them and start working with each of them. He brought them together as a community. So that was an intentional online community for knowledge workshop architects. So it was called the Knowledge Workshop Architects Community, which is QUAC. And so the QUAC was convened, I think, quarterly, and some of it was online because they all had to learn how to use the system and use it for shared screen and all that. What we're doing right now, we could do that. And then at least once a year they would come together at headquarters, and then they could learn new stuff and share together for a team. How are we each going to bring this into our organization? Because that's a big, how do you change an organization? How much to introduce, how fast? What are the best groups to start with? Who are going to be the best expedition teams? It's a pilot project. You don't just take people on the front line. So all these questions, they could help each other. And so just to, the playful nature of all of this, besides being the QUAC community, that they elected a chairperson for the community every year, and that was the King QUAC. So they had, and they got to do that. So they got to have a separate session without my dad's, separate, so just the quackers in a room by themselves, and that's, they would talk about issues that were important to them, and then come back and report. So they got some time to do this because they shouldn't have to always, so not everything had to be witnessed by the researchers.
Right.
Then we can come back and say, well, we've decided that we think this would be better, and tell us why I shouldn't or whatever. And that's where they elected to come back as well. So they have a little sense. This developed over time, but anyway, so that was the next phase, was to bring in the next level of users. And so most of them, by the time the funding was cut, which was within less than 10 years after the Mother demos, it's a lot of contribution to more collaborative tools were brought online, and a lot more sophistication and the way people work together and all that kind of stuff. That was the next level, and they didn't all get enough of a foothold in to really change the organization. They all had pilot projects, and that was all going smoothly. But then the next one would be, let's do some deeper pilots. If we pool our resources, we can do some deeper pilots into 1 or 2 organizations, and share the planning and the implementation and all that, and then share the results, because it's a lot easier to propagate a pilot that has already worked someplace else. And so, it was working in my dad's lab, but was put out in the real world, and then propagate it from there. So we talked about, there's content, that's the research agenda, but then there's the process. So part of the process was understanding that. What do we know about pilot projects, and how to conduct them, and how to decide, who's suitable for them, and all that kind of stuff. So all of those questions were considered and part of the culture.
So always scrutinizing their own processes, as well as thinking about what that kind of research revealed about what the next step might be.
Right. So they were very creative, and there was a lot of just open, expansive thinking and all that. And they were very disciplined about certain things. Like, okay, we're going to need to be able to do this. What do we know about it? Nothing is really, there's nothing in the literature. There's nothing, so okay, let's figure it out. And so they did. So they figured out all these things, and each one, could be a whole field or discipline in themselves. So
Quite a 10, and I guess almost a little over 15 years, from 62 up to the time when funding stopped.
Yeah.
And we're still at about phase 2 or 2.5 of a process that had at least 5 phases involved. So at what point did this idea of the network improvement community, because that really does sound like the scaling mechanism you're describing, at what point does that emerge as part of the way he's talking about a kind of self-renewing and self-stimulating process?
Right. Well, it's really embedded in the 1962 paper. So, the idea here that the bootstrapping, where the research team is using itself as the first end user, and they're the guinea pigs initially. And they are, and then when you can become networks, so the QUAC, the knowledge works of architects community, that would be the next wave of end user organizations. That was a networked improvement community. So he didn't come up with that terminology until later, I think the 1990s, when he was giving some more thought again to all of these concepts. In the late 80s and early 90s, we started a graduate seminar, management seminar series at Stanford. And so we got out all of this work, basically all the slides, all of this concept, and we looked at them again. How can we present this better or whatever? and coming up with new terminology. For some of it's in networked improvement communities and the dynamic knowledge repository, all that terminology. Collective IQ, he coined that term in 1994, I think I established. So, yeah, and the bootstrapping is already there, augmenting, obviously. So, yeah, but he kept formulating his ideas and terminology for it.
So for him, those phases never ended. He was always looking forward to the next.
Right. And the idea would be that there should be deep pilot projects. I mean, independent of whether his lab survived, there should be many experiments, not just one technology, but many experiments and many groups that were using the whole thing. So if you look at what's demonstrated in 1968, it's a comprehensive environment. They did all their software development on there, and it was all hypertext enabled. So their bug reports, so we have a bug report, it just links into the code and vice versa. This satisfies this bug, and we just have a link to the. I mean, we didn't have to have a whole separate app or a whole separate environment for software development, because all of these tools lend themselves to all of these tasks. But it's very comprehensive. So what was I going with that?
Well, if it's okay at this point, what I'd like to do is look at what we're doing on the Thought Vectors website as an example of a kind of network improvement community. It is that, but it's also trying to do that thing that your dad talks about in the demo, to show rather than just tell, which admittedly a lot of folks will find challenging at first, because you're kind of plunged into it, and you have to be making sense of it a little bit on the fly. But there's really not much way to describe it that gets across the shift that you mean. It's more, let's get in there and see what this looks like. So let me go ahead and pull up the screen share here, and this should now be live. You should be seeing. Are you seeing the screen on your?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
so what the overall architecture of this is basically taking all of the individual thought vectors, which for the purpose of this little demo, we'll say, are the individual ideas that are being launched into a shared space. The individual students' work that's being documented in their own web space, which I would think of as their own dynamic knowledge ecosystem. And in fact, some of the students in the section this week are working on just exactly how they have been leading conceptual networks. But those individual thought vectors are then united, aggregated into this concept space, in which you can see there are these recent vectors. There are ways to look at various slices of the community. You can look at just what the open participants, those who are not taking the class for credit, what they are thinking about in terms of the work that we're doing together. You can see that folks are still working on associative trails. They're working on the ideas that kind of inform this week's work on your father's work. There are these augmenting human intellect nuggets. We can dive in and see that what's being asked here is people to take a particular passage that seems to be, very interesting or resonant in some way, and then make it meaningful. And this particular person quotes, "In other words, the human mind neither learns nor acts by large leaps, but by steps organized and structured so that each one depends upon its previous steps," and goes in to think about how does this relate to what other people are doing with this nugget? How does this connect with ideas about neuroscience, about technology? In other words, to try to take an individual thought vector from your dad's essay and make it into a bigger concept space, which then becomes their thought vector, launched into yet another large concept space. I mean, when you look at this, are you seeing things that look like the paradigm that you're following?
Yeah, absolutely. It's on many levels, and as you pointed out, it's recursive. So this is the course ecosystem here that's represented on this website, and everybody involved is doing something on here. They're looking at the Twitter feeds, they're feeding into the Twitter feeds, they're feeding into the blogs, they're capturing new thoughts and original, tying together the pioneers' thoughts. So that's the ecosystem for the collective knowledge that's developing in this course. It started as a blank slate, and here it is filling with this fabulous stuff. And it's very dynamic, obviously, and everything's being captured in a way that you can go, find it again. Things have persistent links so that you can say, hey, this ties together with this, and you can actually create links to those and to things off, out in the web. So all that is really great. And then in terms of process, so how did all that come to be? There was a whole process that you started back in the fall, was it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I remember having that initial conversation with you when you told me your idea, and wow, yes, count me in. And so that started a process very much like what my father did in his lab. Who are the people to pull together for something like this? It's really, part of his approach with the bootstrapping and everything starts with who are the people who should be part of the solution. He's handpicked a group that became the knowledge worker, the quacks. You handpicked a group that became the support structure for this, the planning and development of this whole environment and the course itself, and it's all evolutionary and it's co-evolving. And what kind of tools did we use? Did you pull the team together? Sometimes face-to-face, and some of it's asynchronous and so that. And what's very cool here, from a bootstrapping point of view, is that the tools you guys use are the ones then that are being used in this course. It wasn't like you sat off in a corner and used one set of tools to design a set of tools that would be, because what we're talking about is research. We're advancing research and research writing and research inquiry, and that's what designing the course was all about too. That's, so why would you need different tools? And so what we're doing here is these are the real tools, and it's not the whole set. This is just the starting set. And the idea is, okay, just start somewhere and keep iterating, and that's how you're going to find, that's how it advances. And so that's what we're doing here. And so I think, and part of what we were talking about yesterday is maybe it's time for the next phase, the next wave, which is, okay, here's the course participants. What are your ideas about this ecosystem that we're working in, and the design? What is your feedback on the design of this course? And are there other tools that we could be using? Are there other methodologies? Can we, we're doing a lot of things asynchronously, and there's a lot of, work in parallel that then collectively comes together. Do we want something like a campfire situation sometimes where we feel like we're really all convened? It's more of a tribal bonding. There's a lot of aspects. The human part of it is important too, as we, discussed and seen. So all of that is open to interpretation and reinterpretation as an environment is designed for research. And, when you go out in the world and you're doing some kind of research or some kind of inquiry, that's, hopefully you're all going to be inquisitive people, and whatever job you end up with or career, you're going to have that element of really advancing forward somehow. What are the tools? What are the conventions? How do you move a group forward to really advance the thinking towards, solutions or better understanding of what the goal is?
Well, it seems to me that many of the students are beginning after 2.5 weeks of being in the middle of this and bootstrapping themselves into the process to realize just how big these dreams are. I mean, as I hear you speak about this, it is indeed a way of life. It's an understanding that you're not going to tinker with one thing. You're going to try to think in as big a systems manner as possible. In fact, if I can get this one up on the screen here and assert the interviewer's prerogative, there is great work, I hasten to add, absolutely wonderful work that's being done in all of the sections.
Yes.
But I wanted to show this one today because it just came across that was, I just was looking at my section's folks and saw this and thought, you know, this is really pretty magnificent. And it gets at just what you're talking about. This is an integrated approach that continues to iterate, the discovery mounts up. And so this is Sarah. Again, I apologize, Sarah. I'm going to massacre your last name. Bernier. I hope I got that somewhat correct. She quotes from your dad's 1962 essay, and let's just stop a minute and realize this is 52 years ago. By augmenting human intellect, we mean increasing the capability of a man to approach a complex problem situation, to gain comprehension of his particular needs, and to derive solutions to problems. Increased capability. And he goes on in a very good engineering fashion, defining his terms, setting it all out. But by the time you get to the end of it, you're, I think, somewhere close to where Sarah was when she says, the reason I chose the first few sentences for her nugget is because they are what set the stage for what I thought about the report the whole way through. My main thought while beginning this reading was, well, isn't this what our careers are supposed to do for us and those around us?
Yes.
So it was just a fantastic moment in which it was clear to me that because of the work of a lot of people and the work that your dad did as well, that suddenly we're in a situation where this way of life in an integrated domain now becomes vividly present to a student through her own work within the environment, using your dad's ideas from those half a century ago within the medium that allows that then to be present in a concept space shared by others. And of course, we all hope that'll go viral, right? And there's a way in which suddenly people will say, "Oh yeah, I'll have that." But it's a very lovely reminder for me of the scale of your dad's vision as well as the urgency. I mean, he really did view this as a matter of human urgency. We had better get better at getting better, and we better do it very quickly. Right.
And this brings me to, there was another post by one of the open participants named Greg Lloyd, who, hi Greg, I hope you're listening.
Let me find that. I'll bring that one up.
He happens to be a colleague of mine, and I think has worked side by side with Andy Van Dam in the past, who worked side by side with Ted Nelson, and then went on and did his own stuff of importance. So Greg was pointing out what motivated Doug Engelbart and the passage that he chose for that, and went on to talk about the Apollo project, which was happening, around the same time as this work, and talking about, well, it's a feat of engineering to be proposed to do the Apollo project, to put, what was it? Was it man in space or just space? Put something in space. That it was on the order of a grand challenge, not just an engineering challenge.
Yes.
And likening that to my father's work and saying, yes, it's an engineering challenge, but it's also on the order of a grand challenge for humanity to find solutions to equipping our problem solvers of society and in business with the absolute most advanced and most effective tools and methodologies and language and training conceivable, because that's the world we need to have, is one that's fashioned by people who can solve the problems or anticipate the problems so that we can avert the problems, or solve more problems, or seize opportunities that are there that we just can't even muster the resources for, let alone try to, we can't, we lose ships, we blow up the environment, we're constantly, as you said at the beginning of this, we can destroy things a lot faster. We can destroy things a lot faster now that we have digital technology and that we're connected globally. We have to get way better at solving problems because of that. So, and my father did anticipate that. Before there was Moore's Law, he did a study in 1959 and 60 on dimensional scaling to satisfy himself that digital technology would become really accessible. It would come down in size and price so that it could actually, be used by real people in business and society. And that's where he realized, oh my God, when that happens, what does that mean, the implications? Penetrating all dimensions of society, what are the ramifications? And he saw that exponential change, that means we need exponential change in how we go about problem solving. So that's the urgency.
And this is the ongoing work of the Institute.
Yes.
Maybe this is a good time to look at the Institute website,
Okay.
and you talk a little bit about what that is. I've got this over here. Do you want to drive this, or I've got it up on this? I should have it up on the screen now.
Okay. You want to just trade places?
No, we're good. If you click on cancel, you'll see that okay. I've got it over here.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So how do I?
Yeah. If you tell me where you want to go, I can drive it, or you can drive it. Yep.
Okay.
See?
So why don't you? So I invite everybody to come to the homepage and watch that video on the homepage. And there's a couple more videos like it on our YouTube channel, which there's a link right there to the YouTube channel. If you scroll to the top, you can see there's sort of three main areas that depict our different vectors of work. One of them is because of the nature of my dad's work, and it's really, on the order of a national treasure, and the archiving of it, and also because it was the systems that he was evolving and the nature of the facilitating knowledge work online and all that. There's a tremendous amount of repository artifacts remaining from his work, and so the archive initiative for that is huge. And
I'll jump in to say that we're really happy and grateful to the Institute for helping to fund 2 Engelbart Scholar Awards.
Yes.
For 2 students, Anissa Cannon and Will Sullivan. Hello, Anissa. Hello, Will.
Congratulations, Anissa and Will. I'm looking forward to working with you.
They are going to be working with the Institute, and especially on the project of making the material in the archives more usable and more discoverable, and helping the work of the Institute to go forward by, as you say, this all the phases that your dad didn't live to see, he nevertheless envisioned, and those materials are in there, so that together we can continue working on getting that vision through more iterations.
Right, and as Alan Kay is famously quoted as saying, what will Silicon Valley do when we run out of Doug Engelbart's ideas? So yeah, they're all in the archives, and hundreds of hours of video of his lectures and interviews, as well as his texts and the texts of the whole research group itself. There's movies. The 1968 demo. There was also a 1969 demo, and so there's an endless amount of work to tag and to make meaningful and pull out the nuggets, as you say.
So if somebody's coming to this site for the first time, let's say, where should he or she start? What would you advise?
Well, I think, given how we're doing this in the class, I would advise going straight to the living history, the archive section. So if you click on that, it will take you to the main portal page for the Doug Engelbart archives. And the physical artifacts are housed at Stanford University Library Special Collections Department and the Computer History Museum, which now has a full archive capability and has about probably a third of the archives in each of those two places, and a third of them still at the Doug Engelbart Institute, ready to, to be handed over to those guys for safekeeping. If you look at these boxes that are scrolling by, those are stories. One of the challenges of an archive is there's stuff, there's things that happened, but they're kind of meaningless unless you have the context. The context is everything. So what's the story about the mouse? What's the story about the key set? Why a key set? Why was it invented? So a lot of these are filled in. There's some that have yet to be done, but you can see the 1962 paper there in the upper left-hand corner.
Doug's big idea.
Yeah, and other links to that. If you scroll down, you go back to that page. If you're interested at all in the archives, I gave a talk at a personal digital archiving conference. If you scroll up a little bit, my talk is there on the right. Yeah. So that's a tour of the archives, a tour of his early work that the archives represent, and then how that work informs the future of archiving and repositories, all in about 20 minutes.
Amazing. And in addition, we've got, let me go back to I talk a little bit because we'll run out of time here shortly, and I want to make sure that we talk about what is along, of course, with the course that we're doing, which is a great, I'm biased, of course, but I think that's, I hope this is one of the examples, one of the demos that what we're doing this summer helps to point people towards a future engagement with the work. But certainly the Engelbart Challenge is a huge part of what the Institute is doing going forward, and I see it's right up here on the first page, creating a brilliant world. So I'm going to click over to that page and maybe ask you to talk a little bit about what it is that you believe this Engelbart Challenge to represent, what you'd like to see come from it, and how we can get involved.
Okay. Well, the idea of the Engelbart Challenge is to take what we were talking about, his work, the body of his work and the vision and everything is really a grand challenge for society. And it has fallen on deaf ears more often than not. Even people who, he's received over 100 awards in his lifetime, including the National Medal of Technology and Innovation from the President of the United States. It's the highest award for technology. And all kinds of other, almost an MIT prize, which was a $500,000 prize. You can't do any better than that. So the recognition was there, but it was all recognition for the tool. So how do we get, anyway, and the important thing is not just getting heard, but, we got to start doing this stuff. And there's lots of different ways to do it. It's all up to everybody, in the future, and it's just not up to me how it's going to be done. But obviously we have a lot of foundation for this and prior work also. Come learn what you can and then start doing it. So the challenge is to start doing it. And what it is like what we'd like to challenge people to do is, raise the collective IQ of an organization or a project or, whatever, because it's going to be creating more brilliant projects, brilliant outcomes, brilliant initiatives, brilliant organizations that then can create a brilliant society and a brilliant world. So it's one community or project or initiative at a time. What's your project? What's your initiative? And can you show how you're using these concepts to further that goal? Not just to raise your collective IQ, but if you really need to be on an exponential curve, that means the way my simple math mind goes, okay, that means we need to double it and double it again and double it again. So what is collective IQ? How do you double it? That's what all this work is. How do you keep increasing it at an increasing rate and scale? But there's simple ways to start, and I've tried to isolate what those are based on all this work. I isolated into five things to keep focusing on, and I like to say, Gardner, Dr. C,
Yes.
that you're doing all of these in this class. It's really fabulous. And that means that the participants in the class are also part of this and doing this.
Well, and that to me is just, it's a thrill. It means that as I'm teaching it and they're learning it, we're both doing it.
Right.
And for me, teaching and learning are versions of the same kind of activity.
Yes.
Which is what I think Alan Kay means when he says that all learning is autodidactic. It's like listening actively to a piece of music. You follow along. You don't just let it wash over you.
Yeah.
Or as one of my students once said, you actually read it, you don't just massage it into your eyeballs.
Right.
and this is really what we're trying to do. So is it these 5 organizing principles?
These are the 5 organizing principles that for accelerating innovation and collective IQ.
So let me just ask you about each of them as we get towards the end here. Network your innovators.
Right.
Is this everything from the quacks to what's going on?
Exactly what I talked about. If you pull together an amazing team that it's multidisciplinary, it's all the kind. There's a librarian and there's people from all different fields involved in the design and the facilitation of this course. Now the students, here are the students and participants, so you all are innovators and come from different backgrounds and interests. It's fabulous. So your observations and everything become part of the collective knowledge. Leverage the collective IQ. That's the dynamic knowledge ecosystem that we're talking about. Right now it's a website with blogs and tweets.
Yes, Twitter
I
feeds.
used the wrong
No, that's all right.
word. And
we are iterating on that.
Exactly. Expanding with more tools, with more, how do we, remember to tag these things so it's easier to search on. Remember, how do we want to convene, all that kind of stuff. That's your knowledge ecosystem. There's a lot that's known about running groups online or, what else can we learn about what's already been done. Focus on the whole capability. We're doing that by talking about it. It's the humans using language,
artifacts and methodology in which they are trained.
Yes.
Yes.
So, and he simplified that later to just say there's a tool system and a human system, and how that works together is what we're talking about. And you don't just change tools, you don't just change the training. Look at all of it. And so there's a whole model for that. And, I think this fall I'm going to be giving a workshop on what all these models actually are and how to apply them. So.
And then it's that acceleration that's so interesting to me, because it's that multiplier effect you're talking about, in which, just to take it back to the example of Greg Lloyd's post on what motivated Doug Engelbart. He will be reading perhaps Sarah's post or somebody else's on what is this considered even more broadly. This is our careers and everything we're trying to do. It's the grand challenge of a life. It's the grand challenge of a species. Somebody else sees that. They start to make this conceptual network. And as they become aware that this is happening, it should build an excitement and energy, right? That acceleration.
Yeah.
People will start to go, oh, I bet if I do this, I'll turn a corner and we'll be able to go even faster.
Right. And so this is happening in multiple dimensions, because what you're talking about is the knowledge, how the knowledge accelerates. And then there's also the acceleration of how the ecosystem, the knowledge is part of the ecosystem, but the rest of the ecosystem, how, this experience is changing how we see how we can work together, or how we can approach a research inquiry. Now that's changing how I think about it, and come to think of it, if we added this tool, that would be, so that's a co-evolution of all the parts, the knowledge, the people, bouncing ideas off each other, the tools, the language.
And some of that has happened just in the last 2.5 weeks. One of the notorious difficulties with the blogging framework is it's very difficult to track comments. But one of the things we've now done is build an engine. Actually, Alan Levine did this. He brought it together so we can click on one link and see the comments by section or by the comment author. And now the next thing we're looking at is, so how do we connect those things together? Because it's an interesting process. You have to reveal the parts. and then be intentional about the connections, and then that process starts to build on itself in some really interesting ways, because then the ideas get to be liberated, you know, then people are starting to think more freely about what they do.
Right, which is great, because otherwise it's all trapped in an app. I mean, there's blogs and there's comments and all that. In order to see that, you have to go to the blog and then scroll down to the comments. And so what you're talking about is you can reconfigure it just on the fly, and that's on the fly. You control that, and that is talking about in his work. So.
And then this last one, which is very interesting to me, and this I think gets back to some of that. You know, you have to lead with your heart. You have to be willing to be committed. My friend Shelley Fowler at Virginia Tech talks about being all in, and the idea being that there has to be something kind of unreserved about it. You really can't say, well, I'll try a little bit of this and be done with it. There's a quality of commitment, and I see it here as walk your talk. So this comes all the way around the clock until we get up to network your innovators again. What do you mean by walk the talk?
Walk the talk, and what you described is beautiful, and it's a quality of thinking. How do I, you know, how will I embody this in my own work? And so if you look at the accelerating evolution part, one of the things that's part of that is pilot projects. So we understand that we can put an ecosystem together, and we can look at the human and the tool side of it, and we can co-evolve, you know, but within a pilot project, it's much more powerful, and that's what you've done here. We haven't just thrown a bunch of, this is a pilot project, and it's evolving, and we're evolving it even as we speak. And so who's in the pilot project? If the designers are in the pilot project, you know, started with the designers. That is walk your talk. That's bootstrapping. That's what my father called bootstrapping, and that's So it's not the designers doing one thing themselves, and then this is for the users. This is, we're all in it together. The pilot starts with the designers, and hopefully the next level of user, the participants, are getting a little bit more polished version than what you guys started with in your design process. And so you start with yourselves. You're going to introduce a new tool. Start by introducing it behind the scenes. I mean, typically that's how that would work. So the design team is walking the talk. The researchers are walking the talk.
One of the ways I tried to put this when I talk to folks about the overall attitude that you don't simply set a thing up as a teacher and then walk away and say, I don't have to do what my students are doing. They're doing their worksheets. I'm not going to do that. I keep saying there is no teacher's edition for this. I don't have the big book with all the answers in the back. I've read a lot. I've thought about it a lot. I've got colleagues who have read a lot. They've thought about it a lot. We're getting together and leveraging our collective IQ, right? We're really building the network of innovators. But this is a process of investigation and inquiry and discovery for us as well, and we are in the midst of this. One of the very early wonderful examples of this was one of our instructors. I'm just going to give her a shout out now. So this is Bonnie Boaz, and we had talked about making a course trailer, a kind of a 2-minute video that would, like a trailer for a movie, would describe the course and so forth. And we were running out of time, and Bonnie was getting ready to go on vacation. She did a very wise thing. She had a vacation just before this class started, so she was well rested. Now I look back at that and I think we should have all done that. But she, because she wanted to get a prototype out there, she made a video of herself doing a version of this song to the Pharrell Williams Happy song, and made it into a video, and it was just great. And we all said, "Oh, Bonnie, you need to use that as your welcome video." And she's like, "Oh no, I don't know." We're like, "No, this is great." And the quality of commitment to that she was doing things that many of us would, we wouldn't sing in front of our classes. But she said something very interesting. She said that in some ways, being online, though it has its limiting factors, it's also a bit freeing, because she could do this. And because it was mediated, it wasn't like she was right there if people were responding one way or another. she could make it and put it out there, and she felt a little freer to do that.
Right.
And it was that quality of commitment and walking the talk, and it was just breathtaking. So
and there's a level of transparency there, and that the vulnerability, because we're in this experiment together.
Yes.
It's it's not the participants of the experiment, and we're the observer. We're behind the scene observers. Through a one-way mirror. We're all in this experiment together.
Well, and obviously this is something that Alan Kay has internalized as well from your dad's example, and so much of it is just right in the center of really good learning theory. But he said in the interview on Friday that the times he'd been involved in working with a class very directly, he would say, "Now you have to give me a writing assignment, and if I'm not able to do it, then you tell me. I need to be able to pass your standards to be part of this class, as well as you to pass my standards to be part of this class." I just thought that was just a very It was, again, it's that idea of being rigorous to say what's good for you is good for me, and we really are in this together. I think it builds trust. I think it lets you know that the captain's not just going to the captain's quarters and dining on caviar, but we're all out here in the tent together trying to make something of this.
I think there's a special quality to all of this work, which can be described as dissolving barriers. Whether you're talking about knowledge, advancing knowledge, we're dissolving barriers. It used to be knowledge was, this is my knowledge, this is your knowledge, this belongs to this corporation, and you can't have it. It's dissolving barriers because we're all working together. Ultimately, you can pull a thread now the way we're all connected. And you don't know what all places in the world are going to be affected by that. I could decide that I'm going to collaborate with somebody who's halfway around the world. They need access to this stuff immediately. And so why would you have barriers? Why would you have, barriers that you can't dissolve? So that's a big part of it. But also dissolving the barriers between us, because we're working together, and that can we work together better if we dissolve some of those barriers, or can we be just as effective if we maintain a distance, on the human realm? These are all important questions to look at. And
they are open questions, questions that we continue to investigate, but we can't really investigate them unless we're in environments like this, thinking our way through, stumbling when we do, but also, I have to say, with just a real optimism that the more we try to do those 5 steps in the paradigm, the more we bootstrap. If we do it with a good heart and with a free mind, good things will have to happen. I mean, I just don't know what the alternative is. I don't think there is one myself.
Well, and that's the thing, is the process is more important than where you think you're going, because you're going to end up in it. If you do it optimally, you're going to end up in a place you never imagined.
Which is the outcome you want.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely the outcome you want.
Because it's going to be beyond anything you could imagine.
That's right. That's right.
And the sooner the better.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I am sorry to cut to the end of this, but as certainly it was the case with talking with Alan Kay and again talking with you today, the time just goes by so quickly, and we get to only a little bit of what we wanted, but maybe we'll have a chance to maybe do a recap towards the end of the time. That would be terrific. Yeah. But let me thank you, first of all, for all the work that you're doing with the Doug Engelbart Institute to carry this forward. You've been a real inspiration and guiding light for me since, I guess it was 2009 or 10.
2009.
When we first met, and it's been just great putting this course together and having your input and having 2 Engelbart scholars. We really are trying to accelerate the whole process here.
Well,
and it's been just a great experience, and I'm just very, very grateful and appreciate all you've done, and look forward to the work ahead.
Great. Well, it works 2 ways, Gardner, because you're an inspiration to me too, and the work that you're doing, that your team is doing, and all these participants, it's just fabulous to see, and it is part of a process, and you've got one going, and here it is in living color, and it's just fabulous. So
we'll see where it takes us.
Great.
Well, thanks so much, and thanks everyone for sticking with us, and As always, this will be available on an archive that will be posted very soon. And we've got more guest speakers on the way, and we'll be very happy to have your participation then. So from Richmond, Virginia, Gardner Campbell here with Christina Engelbart at the Doug Engelbart Institute, saying thanks for being part of this, and we look forward to more brilliant futures as we work together on our collective IQ.
Yes.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you.